everybody and welcome back to my channel. This week's video is all about my other rescue pony Reggie. You'll find out how he came to be with me, how we've been using positive reinforcement to address his behavioural issues, and also all about his experience with chronic pain. So Reggie's my 13-year-old 14 hand-high Andalusian Exmoor Welsh pony cross. Yep, I know that's incredibly weird breeding, but the mare hopped the fence to go and see the stallion, and the rest is history. Reggie came to me after I lost my previous horse and hat horse Jake in September 2022. Obviously I didn't want to keep Ollie alone, and he also struggles with that more than most because of his sight issues, so although he did have horses next door that he could interact with, it became a really top priority for me to want to find him a friend, despite not really feeling like I wanted another horse at that time. I contacted my friends over at the rescue where I got Ollie from and asked if there was anything that they felt would be suitable to bond with him. I tend to take the ones from them that they feel they'd struggle to rehome otherwise, and so they offered me to come and see Reggie. Now the interesting thing about Reggie is that he had actually been available for adoption previously, and I'd seen his advert and wanted to go and view him, but he was rehomed before I got the chance, and as a result of that I ended up going to see Ollie. So it did feel like a little bit of a weird kind of fate scenario when Reggie reappeared in my life, and it was a no-brainer that I was just going to go and see him anyway. He was originally surrendered in 2020 after his previous owners didn't want him anymore because of behavioural issues that they didn't want to deal with both under saddle and on the ground. He was adopted out several months later but returned a little while before I went to view him back in September 2022. When I first met Reggie, I was disappointed that it wasn't love at first sight. He came across as quite intimidating and bullshit, and I was warned that he had kicked before and did also bite. He was the type that wandered around with his ears back and was struggling to fit in with the herd and make friends, so although I felt that we didn't connect, I did feel quite sorry for him. I came away unsure of what to do and I wanted to go and see what else was available to me, but there was just something about him that I couldn't quite leave behind, so I agreed to go and see him again. Again, I didn't feel that we connected, but I had been told that he wasn't right in his hind end and they hadn't found an answer yet. He was also very overweight, which they were struggling to control, and I had noticed that he had quite a persistent pain face. With all of those factors considered, I decided that he was going to come home with me, and I'm very grateful that my friends over at the rescue trusted me to take care of him and figure out what was going on. When Reggie first came home, I very sensibly kept him and Ollie separate, especially since Ollie has a long history of being very aggressive towards other horses. They absolutely hated each other and were pretty awful to each other, and I did wonder if I'd actually be able to keep Reggie, but with a lot of hard work I did manage to bond them and now they're good friends. More on that in another video. It was a process. After Reggie had settled in, I made it a priority to book him in for a bodywork session, as my friend on the yard at the time was an equine massage therapist training to be a physio, so it made sense to do that first since it was so accessible. We found he was in quite a lot of pain and had very tight muscles. He was quite aggressive in the session and clearly struggling, so we agreed to continue trialling bodywork as he did improve throughout that session. He was put straight onto a track system while separated from Ollie and then onto my track in my field, as he was very overweight and the rescue had struggled to get him to lose it. Over the winter we slowly bonded. It took a long time after losing Jake, but I eventually started to see a very sweet soul behind all the aggressive behaviour and really started to fall for him. I started to try and teach Reggie the basics of positive reinforcement and realised both through this and when putting him out in the field that he was extremely food aggressive and quite similar to Ollie in that way. He was fed ad lib hay despite his weight and had restricted grazing and as much movement as possible due to the track, but it felt like something else was at play. It took me a long time to get him to a point where he was calm around food and a lot of experimenting with various reinforcers. When we started to try movement in training and following targets, he was clearly unhappy, and movement in general seemed to trigger unhappy behaviour, so we continued trying to figure out what was going wrong. He was still far from right after several sessions of bodywork. I ended up stopping training him as I felt he was unhappy, and despite investigations we had no answers other than being pretty sure that he's arthritic and suspected EMS. Over the spring I got some advice and ended up testing him for PSSM 1, which he was negative for, and at the same time PSSM 2. This was something I'd considered might be a factor, but I didn't know a huge amount about it at the time. However, when I looked it up I did find that Reggie was actually very classic PSSM 2 symptoms. After spending lots of time trying to find out what was wrong with him, he was eventually diagnosed with PSSM 2 in autumn, which has made so much sense. His diagnosis fits in perfectly, and I'm happy to say that after putting some of the suggested management recommendations for both the P2 and PX variants in place that he was diagnosed with, he is slowly improving. We've now been able to use positive reinforcement for lots of things with Reggie. He knows the basic behaviours as well as things such as being able to put his own head collar on. I retrained him to be led both at liberty and in a head collar, and we started competing in horse agility last year. We've also been able to use it for cooperative care behaviours such as consent for injections, and also rugging, which has been a big one for him having PSSM, as he was previously quite aggressive and sometimes even dangerous to get a rug on. But it's an absolute essential for a PSSM horse and one of the things that has led to him improving. He's turned into such a huge personality, and I'm so glad I chose to bring him home in the end, as he really is one of a kind and has taught me so much, especially about training horses living with chronic pain. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Reggie a little bit and seeing how positive reinforcement can be a great way of working with a horse with chronic pain issues, and I'll be sure to educate more on things such as PSSM and working with horses with chronic pain, as they're two topics I've become very passionate about raising awareness of.